Here and now, here we are. And the developments of the internal Israeli Jewish revolt against the Zionist government of Netanyahu are evident. And I will bring all the pieces together to show you the grand picture of developing what will we call it? Jewish revolution against Zionism. It's not a civil war that has not broken out, but the divisions in the Israeli Jewish society are fundamental now. So we shall share the information that is available here. Let's start here. Okay. This is an X posting showing pictures of the 15 medical workers who were executed by the IDF, the Imperial Death Force of the Zionist state. And here is even a UN vehicle. You can see the end there that was crushed together with the ambulances here and then buried together with the bodies to hide the evidence. Now, prior to the paramedics' mobile phone with video showing their procession along the road, with their lights blazing, which contradicted the military claim that there was no indications that these were ambulances or a UN vehicle in the nighttime. Then there was no choice by the authorities who had to react to the public indignation internationally. And as a result, there was minor disciplinary measures being taken against the officers in charge of that massacre. The Zionist probe found that troops did not violate the code of ethics, but made professional errors. Profession. What profession is that? Murder Incorporated? And breached protocols when they opened fire on ambulances, fire truck, and a UN vehicle on March 23rd. The Israel Defense Forces on Sunday announced the dismissal of a deputy commander of the Golani Brigade's reconnaissance unit over an incident on March 23rd in which his forces opened fire on a convoy of ambulances and emergency vehicles in southern Gaza's Rafah, including a fire truck painted red, big red, like fire truck. They claimed it was, Hamas truck, killing 15 rescue workers. Commander was also removed from his role for his partial and inaccurate report of the incident during a preliminary investigation, the military said. In other words, he lied. And additionally, the IDF said the commander of the 14th Reserve Armored Brigade, the unit leading the operation in Rafah when the killing of the medics took place, has been formally censured for his overall responsibility for the incident, including management of the scene afterwards. In other words, lying. Censured. Wow. Heavy duty, like penalty there. 15. Okay. If the, standard, imprisonment, for murder is 20 years, 20 times 15, would mean, something more than censure, really. And what is happening on the Israeli scene? Here's the Israeli protesters against the failure to make a deal with Hamas to release the hostages and end the war for a permanent ceasefire. They're getting doused, with skunk oil. Police fire skunk liquid at protesters during demonstrations against the decision of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to fire Shin Bet head Ronan Bar in Jerusalem, March 20th. of this year, 2025. Yes. Uh, anyway, goes on, with some excuses in the Times of Israel. But this is being reported inside in the Zionist press here. And then here at Brown University, there's a celebration because the administration has agreed to divest itself of any connections, with the Zionist state. And so they're celebrating the victory here at Brown University. These are the students, including many, many Jewish students. I've heard it estimated that in the general protests here of the students, about 30, 40% are Jewish students, pointing to the lie that such demonstrations are anti-Semitic. And yes, this prisoner of war soldier who was taken hostage during October the 7th has been killed by the Imperial Death Force, the IDF. And if you actually go to my Facebook and look at the video sent out by this hostage, in which he denounces the Zionist government of King Bibi, you would almost think that the Zionist military found out where he was and deliberately killed him in order to punish him for his critical remarks of the Zionist government. You can go to my homepage on Facebook, and you can see the video interview of him in this video here. Next, the Zionist military is suffering in Rafah, and Hamas has not backed down. And even, the trick that the Zionists have tried to play on Hamas here by offering to provide amnesty for the Hamas leaders if they would leave, Gaza and take off somewhere with a present being given to them of some villa somewhere in order to give up on the struggle for Palestinian liberation, has been refused by the Hamas leadership. Yeah. This was tried, and actually, Arafat agreed to such a deal in 1982 in Beirut, Lebanon, when 5,000 PLO fighters handed over their arms and left for Tunisia, leaving the Palestinian refugee camps at the mercy of the local forces, supposedly a deal brokered by the United States in which the United States guaranteed the safety of the Palestinian refugees. Well, the United States did not guarantee the safety of those Palestinian refugees, despite, their supposed agreement with Fatah and Abbas. And Abbas, was there too, he and Arafat, agreed to leave, the Palestinian refugees without, any defense. And so the Zionist military surrounded the refugee camps, sent in the phalangist fascist militia of the Christian Maronites of Lebanon, who massacred 3,000 Palestinians in 3 days. In the night, with knives, so as not to make any noise, and 3,000 were killed. So this cannot be allowed to happen again. So the Palestinian militias cannot disarm, neither in Syria, Lebanon, or in Gaza. No way, no how. Next, can have a look. In Lebanon, Leith Marouf, comrade from Montreal here, who organized a demonstration that blocked Netanyahu from coming to speak at Concordia University, a demonstration at which I spoke as well. And he is now in Lebanon, and he reports on the Zionist, destruction of a mausoleum for a Jewish prophet, Benjamin, the 12th son of Jacob, destroyed. The tomb itself has been preserved, though, protected by the dome here that collapsed on top of the tomb. And the tomb is inside there. You can see it in the video. Here's a photo of Moria sunset. Okay. Yes. So, the Zionist military doesn't care if they kill any more hostages, prisoners of war there in Gaza. Now, is reported here by Mahmoud, who does an excellent job of reporting from both the Arabic, Hebrew, and English media coverage, of the assault on the Palestinians. And he reports now that the number of prisoners of war, Israeli prisoners of war, military, personnel who are held by Hamas, are being killed one by one by the Israeli strikes on the Gaza. And now 42nd prisoners of war has been killed now. And that's out of 59. So that's more than half. The remaining prisoners of war have been killed by the Zionist military. Here's a former hostage who was treated very well by Hamas. Hamas with the green headband here. Here she is thanking Hamas for being well treated. I think she is, a Holocaust survivor. She's the one who's been reported as being, the Holocaust survivor who was taken hostage by Hamas. And here she is, and she's okay, and being turned over in exchange for the Palestinian prisoners. Okay. Yeah. Europe is being armed, with nuclear warheads. There are nuclear missiles, intermediate range nuclear missiles in Poland pointed at Moscow. And Russia's supposed to take this, as a measure of kindness. What else is it supposed to consider, this other than, a threat? So these are all, very important. Francisca Albanese, was then reinstated for another 3-year period as a UN rapporteur. All of this, should be looked at, on my Facebook page, by people. Important, documentary material that should be shared. Yes. Now, Russia's coming to the conclusion of its military intervention in the Russian territories of the Ukraine, which are now being liberated nearly entirely. And there's nothing left to negotiate because the war is coming to an end. Here's Jason, with another excellent, video that he makes. Have a look at that too. All this is, very important information. Here's a report, from an intelligence agent, that considers that that she was taken out, because she was going to be making some sympathetic remarks, for Palestinians. Oh, yes. Here's the latest work of mine. I find great pleasure and relief, from stress in doing art. Here's my latest artwork. I wouldn't call it art, really. It's just a design. But, it is a scientific design, so that you have an exponential, like perspective, built into this. Economically, Professor Wolf here, like knows what he's talking about. Here's another Mahmoud, video. Very important work. And even Trump, is sane enough, to know that an attack upon Iran, like has deadly consequences to it. Like if the United States helped Israel attack Iran in such an instance, like then all the US military bases around Iran would be taken out. and he knows it. And he doesn't want that. So, okay, that's enough for now. Now, the major comment I have to make here is that there has to be a strategy, which I've written about in my strategies for Palestinian liberation, that just uploaded to academia.edu. It's there under the books. There has to be a strategy in order to succeed in Palestinian liberation. If there is no strategy, then Palestinians can be destroyed. Like this is a pessimistic thing to say, but this is the experience that I have, you know, um, emerged out of, because the Jewish people of Europe were destroyed by the Zionist occupation because there was no strategy. The Jewish Bund had a strategy, but it was not backed up by the Soviet Union, it was not backed up by the Zionists. And eventually, the great majority of the Jewish Bundeswehr and the working class of the European Jewry were eliminated by the Nazi occupation, which destroyed the evidence in the crematorium, which were nonetheless, provided as evidence. Now, the Soviet Union didn't provide any help to the Jewish Bund, but it did allow for Jewish refugees, to find their way into the Soviet Union, like my parents. My father told me what it was like, to go to the border of the USSR while escaping from the Jewish shtetl of Bialki and from the ghetto of Lublin. And when he comes to the border, Jewish refugees, were just not allowed in automatically. The first thing the soldier said, my father, "What are you doing here?" So I says, "I've come to work." Because if you say, you want to seek refuge, as a Jewish person, fleeing the Nazis, that wouldn't, get you into the Soviet Union. That wasn't good enough. So he said, that he had come to work and to help the Soviet Union. So the soldier, decided this wasn't good enough, so he said to my father, "Show me your hands." So my father showed him the hands, the hands of a worker with a calluses. And then, on the other side, showed him his forefinger, with a nail that had been crushed, while working, probably hit himself with a sledgehammer. And so that was good enough proof, so he was allowed into the Soviet Union to work. And then when he missed a day of work, because his foot was sore and he went to the doctor, to have some sort of, remedy, perhaps to prevent an infection. So the doctor said to him, "Well, quite empirically, like logically, scientifically, if he was able to make it to the doctor, that meant he could have made it to the work day." And the work, like at that time was under martial law. According to Trotsky's, the new course, martial law, in which the entire working class, was conscripted, to do, labor in order to save, the economy. And so he went back to work the next day, and the doctor who had refused to give him a letter, a notice, a note of amnesty, from the day's work, because of ill health. So the doctor who refused to give him that letter, he comes, to work the next day. And the Jewish woman who was the head of the communist, who was the political commissar, of the factory, supposedly, like of the Soviet, but the Soviets were abolished in 1926, so this was just, Communist Party apparatchik, who was dictator of the factory and had all the power of a bourgeois owner, even though she was not an owner, nonetheless, asked for my father's, letter of permission from a doctor to have missed a day of work, which he didn't have. So she had him arrested, right? He was sent into prison. He didn't get a trial right away, because, like there's a lot of people getting arrested, So 6 months later, comes to a trial. The judge hears the story and says, "Oh, this is ridiculous," and acquitted him of any penalty for having violated martial law. So he was not only acquitted, but he was granted amnesty from conscription into forced labor. So after that, he was free to roam around from one city to another, engaging in the black market, selling goods from one city to another city, and survived in that way. So, this lack of strategy, sectarian, ideological misleading of the working class, by the Communist Party is what is happening now in terms of, Palestinian liberation as well. Because if there's no strategy, if it's simply a matter of, like denouncing all of those who are not actively engaged in support for the Palestinian liberation, as being traitors and fascists and Zionists, all of this, like it leads nowhere. Because one, Palestinian resistance is magnificent, heroic, and dedicated, principled, and even politically correct, is not strong enough, to save the Palestinian people. After a month of no provisions whatsoever being allowed into the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians in Gaza are faced with complete and utter defeat and genocide. This can happen, because this is what happened to the Jewish people. There is no international aid. UN is not providing, any blue helmets, go there and protect the Palestinian peoples and provide a security corridor, to prevent the occupation of Gaza Strip and to ensure that crossings, are working to allow provisions in from Egypt at the Rafah crossing, for instance. No, that's not happening. Is the Egyptian military coming in to open up the Gaza crossing, to allow in provisions, to the Palestinians who are starving? No, that's not happening. The Egyptian military is mobilized there. They've got, like tens of thousands of soldiers and tanks, sitting, waiting there, to prevent any forced expulsion of the Palestinians into the Sinai Desert, which is what had been planned, by the Zionist military. They even had maps and, putting them on a territory, away from the Mediterranean, like somewhere, into the desert there, where they would be surrounded, by supposedly the Egyptian military working in coordination, with the Zionist state. Okay, that's not happening. So this, Egyptian military is not willing to go that far, but they're not willing to open up the Rafah crossing either, which they could. It's a crossing into Egypt, should be under Egyptian Palestinian control, but no. The Zionists have taken control of the Philadelphia corridor all along the border with Egypt, and they're not allowing any provisions to come in. And they're trying to prevent any sort of tunneling as well, to allow provisions to come in. So that's not working either. UN's not working. Palestinian resistance is not strong enough. Egypt is not willing to come to the rescue of the Palestinians. What's left? Turkey? Turkey is not even, willing to go down and prevent Israel from aggrandizement of the territories that it occupies in southern Syria. Hezbollah, are they doing anything to kick out the Zionist military from the 5, mountaintops, in southern Lebanon? No, not doing anything. They're concerned about, being disarmed, by the Lebanese government. So forget about them. The only support, that they're getting is from Yemen. Okay, Yemen is doing a magnificent job, in preventing any goods, to be brought in to the Zionist state, from the Eilat port, in the Red Sea there. But that's about it. Okay. So they closed down one crossing into, the Zionist state. And they're taking on the US military, which is trying to take control of the Red Sea. Okay, fine, And sometimes they fire ballistic missiles into the Zionist military bases or Ben Gurion Airport, which is the only airport available, to the Zionist state, which is rather interesting strategy. But, that's not enough either. So what's left? Okay. Oh, most people in Palestinian Solidarity Movement will say, oh, there's nothing left. It's all up to us. We have to do, what we can. which is not enough. Are the protests, of the students in the United States of America at university campuses enough? No. Especially when the Palestinian solidarity movements are not even, featuring the fact that, such a large percentage of the protesters there are Jewish students. Are the Jewish-led protests, such as the occupation of the Congress foyer, being featured to provide, proof that there is Jewish support, for the Palestinian liberation, and that it's not a matter of a binary struggle between good and evil, between Palestinians and Jewish people? No, it's not that at all. It's a Zionist state, making an occupation in the name of Judeo-Christianity, in alliance, the Christian nation state that calls itself the United States of America. In the words of Trump, one nation, one faith. Guess which faith he's talking about. Okay. So students are not going to liberate Palestine either. So how is it going to happen? Now, all these, factors, can increase their intensity eventually. But I'm talking about right now, right here and now, there's genocide happening and how to stop it. Now, I've just given you the proof, that there is a mass movement happening inside the Jewish Israeli population against the Zionist government of King Bibi. And it's growing. There was even inside the military of the Zionist state, which started off with a letter of 500 infantry who refused to go and fight in Gaza, including officers. Next, practically the next day, such, a letter of 1,000 in the Air Force signed a letter saying they will not go and drop bombs on Gaza anymore. And 900 of them were reservist pilots, 100 were active duty pilots, who refused to go and bomb Gaza. And they were suspended. Yeah. What more can they do? They can't take on, the military, at such a scale as that. Individuals, like refuseniks who refuse to go in and join the military and be conscripted, are sent into prison for 6 months at a time or something. They can be taken care of, one at a time. But now, there was 1,000 pilots who refused to go in and bomb Gaza. Then what happened? Another letter of 111,000, signed saying they want an end to the war and they don't want to fight. Military. This is growing. Now, there's another chart. And so that's, where the strategic, emphasis can be made. Is there a alliance with the Jewish-Israeli opposition to the war in Gaza? No, they're on their own. And they're not even being, featured or supported, by the Palestinian resistance. Because, what? All Jewish people are Zionists? Bullshit. The Jewish Bund, represented the majority of the Jewish people in Europe, and they were not Zionists. They were anti-Zionists. And now, 55, more than 55% of the Jewish people who refuse to go and live in Israel, don't want to go and live in Israel, are not Zionists, are sympathetic, to the Jewish Israelis, yes, as family members, etc. But otherwise, the state, forget it. They don't want to go. And they're becoming more and more critical. In fact, a majority of the young Jewish people, are in opposition to the Zionist state. Now let's have it. Let me show you. I think it's here. Yeah. Yeah, here it is. American sympathies in the Middle East situation, okay? Middle East situation. Even the RT calls it situation, like the Zionists talk about the situation. The situation in Gaza. Oh, yeah, well, okay. So this is the general sort of state of consciousness of the U.S. American sympathies. And sympathies, it's, they call it Israelis. RT is, like, mixed up here. It's not as Israelis that people are being sympathetic to. It's, to the Zionist state. Now, the Palestinians are getting more and more support here. And the Zionist state is failing, less than 50% now. And even in spite of, the corporate reports that are feeding, news, TV news, to the American public that is generally sympathetic, to the Zionist state, nonetheless, 33% are now supporting the Palestinians. Now, how to make it, like completely reversed is a matter for featuring the Jewish American opposition to the Zionist state. In my own case, I can show you, what is being done here. Here it is right here. Now, the differences between Zionism and the Jewish identity is something that I'm going to prove now in court. This is a legal action I'm taking against the Federation Combined Jewish Appeal and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the two major Zionist-controlled organizations in Canada. And they're now being sued because of their discrimination of myself because of my nationality being Jewish Bundes in particular, and the political discrimination, which I'm entitled to carry without discrimination according to the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms and the Canada Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Okay, so this is available on the academia.edu website, under jurisprudence. And this is, I'm going to be taking this, to the Human Rights Commission, which is a tribunal that deals with constitutional matters here in Quebec. And I think the 42 pages that I provided here of proof will be accepted, and I will be able to defeat Zionism and legally in court to prove that the opposition to Zionism is not based upon anti-Semitism. It's based upon a legitimate Jewish identity and based upon opposition to the criminal negligence of the Zionist state as exposed by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. So that's another step that's being taken here that you should know about. Okay, that's all I have to say for today. There's so much more that can be said, but you can just, pick it up, yourselves by going to my Facebook page and going to the academia.edu page as well, where I have, all the various books, including the Federation of Palestinian and Hebrew Nations, second edition, and the Strategies for Palestinian Liberation, the two books, they're most recent there, in addition to all of the other material coming from the doctoral thesis and the various other books, which now number, some dozen books, for Palestinian liberation that I've come out with on behalf of the Jewish Bund, and as well the jewishsocialistbund.net website for the Jewish Bund, the Jewish Socialist Bund, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Bund, the Jewish Anti-Zionist Bund is right there, and should be picked up, by all the Jewish, militants, are looking for the basis upon which to oppose Zionism from a Jewish perspective and a Jewish identity, and not from an assimilationist identity, not from a Reformed Jewish identity, not from a simple, a solitary Judaic identity, but from a Jewish identity in general, including Judaism, which I've pointed out, does not condone genocide, in spite of the fragments that were injected into the Jewish Torah by Ezra, the editor, in 350 BCE, but rather, the original Torah of the Samaritans and the J edition, which was first produced in 950 BCE, which does not contain the genocidal impacts. All of this can be picked up, in the Strategies for Palestinian Liberation, which is to be used to expose the falsity of Zionism and the manipulation of the Jewish people made by Zionist propaganda. There you go. All of that available for you for free. And that's Here and Now, Here Today.